We'll get started with Bernard's keynote presentation. Now, Bernard is one of my closest friends, one of my dearest friends. We've known each other for very, very many years, and we share many interests, but a particular one in the paranormal, that's psychical research, and the links between that and spirituality. And Bernard has developed that in a sense. Why did I think of Brian? I've never thought of you as Brian. Yes. Maybe I was thinking Brian Whitteen. Maybe. So anyway, Bernard has also developed that interest in the area of science and its link up with spirituality. One of his best, I think, publications, his recent address when he was president of the SPR, which has been published by the Society for Psychical Research under the title of Two Worlds. He's linking these two things, but he's doing it with an extraordinary level of scholarship. Bernard is chair in mathematics and astronomy at the University of London, Queen Mary College, University of London. And his contribution to psychical research goes back to his undergraduate days, in fact, at Cambridge, when he became interested in the subject. And when I first joined the Society for Psychical Research getting on for 20 years ago, it was clear to me at the time that Bernard was not only the prime organizer behind the society, but one of the prime movers in terms of the intellect and the scholarship of the subject. He is very interested in our area, very interested in transpersonal psychology, very interested in the links with spirituality, between spirituality and psychical research. And he and I'm going to stop in a moment, otherwise I'm taking too much of his time, but he and I have always been very interested, I think, in the philosophy of psychical research. What does it mean if the mind has these non-physical abilities? What does it actually tell us? So, Bernard, without further ado, may I mention your recent book, Jumping the Gun. One of Bernard's many qualities is that he always tends to be late for meetings. And today he was early. But he has the nickname of the late Bernard Carr. But not late in any spiritual sense, certainly. Bernard's recent book, Universe or Multiverse, published by Cambridge University Press. This gives you a small insight into his enormous scholarship. He's also a very, very nice man. Bernard, I'll hand over to you.
So thank you, David, for those kind words of introduction. I wasn't upset to be called Brian. I remember there's that wonderful film, The Life of Brian, which was also based on a misidentity. So that's
I'm Dennis, by the way.
Oh, okay. Well, it is a great pleasure to be here. I've never spoken to the Transpersonal Psychology Group before, but I've known about you for a long time, and of course I've known and been friends with many of the people who played a key role in setting it up, and it's really great to see it still going strong after 13 years. Yeah. Well, today my title is Can Science Be Extended to Incorporate Normal, Paranormal and Spiritual Experience? And most of my activities, I guess, are really focused on the paranormal side of this, in terms of my interest in psychical research. But also, what I want to cover today is the link with the spiritual, and indeed the link with the normal. And I want to stress that I think that's very important. If people want to know more about any of these topics, the two papers, one is my Proceedings article, Worlds Apart, Can Psychical Research Bridge the Gulf Between Matter and Mind? Very long, it's 100 pages, I'm afraid, but so if you've stuck on a desert island or something. And the second article, Parapsychology as a Bridge Between Science and Parapsychology, published a couple of years ago in the Christian Parapsychologist. And today's talk will involve sort of various bits from both of those. David, do I count from the start of my hour from when I begin to talk?
What I would do would be to take your hour, and then if there's time after.
From when I start to talk, though, not the 9:50. Thank you.
So starting at 12:30.
Oh, great. Okay, that's even more. Anyway, so now There we go. Now, one of the themes of my presidential address was that parapsychology is a bridge. You might recall that was in the title. And in particular, it's a bridge between many things. It's a bridge between matter and mind. Now, as you know, there's been hundreds of years of debate about the relationship between matter and mind. What is interesting about paranormal phenomena is that they seem to involve a direct interaction between mind and matter. If paranormal phenomena are real, I'm not going to get into that question, I just take that for granted for the purpose of this meeting, it means consciousness can directly interact with the physical world. And there's no other place in science where that happens, except, of course, through our own processes, through our own brains, which presumably is an interaction between the mind and the physical world. But here I'm talking about interactions which don't go via the brain. But I want to extend that concept a bit more. Also, involves both experiment, which is what people do in the laboratory, and experience. And already here you can begin to see the sort of the two sides of psychical research, the people who work in the laboratory and the people who go out in real life and study spontaneous cases. To me, it's interesting, in French, it's the same word, expérience. It's the same word which is used, but we make this distinction. And also, there is the distinction between the third-person description of the world, which is what is beloved by science, and the first-person description, which is, of course, how we actually experience things. And again, I see parapsychology as making a link there. And more generally, it's a link between science, the methods of science, and spirituality. You know, of course, that Descartes made this famous distinction between res cogitans and res extensa, which is essentially defining the domain of science. So that was the domain of science, and the rest was the domain of God. And that was a very useful distinction to make, because that really, by defining science, that was how science sort of got off the ground. But what I want to argue is that nowadays that division is misleading. You have to bridge science and spirituality. So all of these bridges, in some sense, parapsychology is going to play a key role in. And actually, it's really two bridges. It's a double bridge between science and spirituality. And the first bridge is really the bridge between science and parapsychology. And to me, that's what we call paraphysics. Now, paraphysics is the attempt to expand physics to incorporate paranormal phenomena. And then the bridge between parapsychology and spirituality is the domain of transpersonal psychology, which of course is what your primary interest is. And I'm actually going to talk about both of these bridges. I'm going to talk about the first bridge, the second bridge I'll talk about, oh no, this isn't a pointer, is it? So the second bridge I'm going to talk about more briefly, because you're very familiar with that. I'll focus more on the first bridge. But the point is, though, that what I'm really wanting to talk about is a new paradigm which connects everything. And so that is the sort of dream. And I want to give you some idea of what I think that paradigm may be. But of course, it's early days. I'm not claiming everything's sorted out. But that's at least, I'll give you some idea of what I think that paradigm is. But the point I want to make is that bridges are great, but they're always problematic. People don't like bridges, by and large. I mean, there's some of us trying to make bridges, but when you make a bridge, you're making a bridge between opposites. And that means there's a battle there. So both of these bridges are going to sort of involve great tensions. I'm sure you've experienced those in the context of transpersonal psychology. I've certainly experienced them in the context of physics. So the outline of my talk, I'm going to talk about the link between normal, paranormal, and spiritual experience, why I think you have to think about all three of these things together. You can't just talk about any one of them in isolation. If you're just going to focus on normal experience, which is what 99% of psychologists do, I guess, you're not going to have a complete picture. If you just focus on paranormal experiences, you're not going to have a complete picture. And if you just focus on spiritual experience, you're not going to have a complete picture. And then I'll talk about the bridge between parapsychology and spirituality, and then the bridge between physics and parapsychology, and then I'll say something about this new all-embracing paradigm. Now, I want to start off by talking about experiences. Can I take my jacket? No, I can't, can I? No, but... I think I just have to transfer my mic. No, I can put that in there like that. Now, this classification actually comes from Dean Radin, but I find I modified it a bit. But what we do in this diagram, we're taking experiences and we're plotting their frequency on the vertical axis and their impact on the horizontal axis. So on the left, I've got mundane experiences. On the right, I've got profound experiences. At the bottom, I've got common experiences. And at the top, I've got rare experiences. So let me go through some of these experiences. We're going to plot the sort of experiences we all have. Down at the bottom, we have things like gut feelings, okay, instincts, which everybody has. Deja vu, I mean, those are, again, I'm sure we've all had deja vu experiences, but these experiences are getting rarer, you see, as we go up. Telepathy, distant knowing, clairvoyance, healing, premonitions. In some sense, these phenomena are less, I'm sure we're still everybody here, I'm sure, has had some of these experiences, but maybe now they're becoming less familiar to you. Creative insight, religious epiphany. We were talking about educational epiphany this morning, but this is religious epiphany, and oceanic mystical feelings and things like that. So that's the sort of span of things which are covered by the word experience. And of course, the people who have them, more or less everyone has them at the bottom. Then we have healers, psychics, geniuses, and saints. So obviously there are fewer, as you go up the diagonal again, there are fewer of them. And I suppose when I talk about normal, we're down there, there's the paranormal and there's the spiritual. And the point is, I see experience, therefore, as sort of spanning the spectrum. And the point I'm making is you can't just talk about paranormal in isolation. So when people talk about making a theory of psi, to me it doesn't make sense unless it's also a theory of all of it, mental experience, normal, paranormal, and spiritual. Now let me give you some examples. Francis Assisi. Is that Teresa of Tequila? Yeah. Saint. Ramanujan. These are geniuses now. Einstein. That's Leonardo da Vinci. Madame Curie. I needed somebody to represent normality, someone who's normal. And to be honest, I could only think of one person who's normal. I'm only joking. So I put myself there. I'm only joking, obviously. Yeah. Now, sorry. No, I was afraid people would think I was being a bit pretentious, but no, I'm the normal one. Yeah. And so these experiences at the bottom, they're universal experiences, amenable to scientific study, what psychologists do and sociologists do, and completely uncontroversial. Then the paranormal, again, common experiences. I mean, most people have had paranormal experiences. And again, they're amenable to scientific study. That's what parapsychologists do, but controversial, of course. Not all scientists believe in them. And then we've got the experiences, which are the mystical experiences, which it's normally assumed are beyond the reach of science. Now, that's something I'm going to actually disagree with to some extent, because I do think some aspects of mystical experiences could be within the domain of science. So I'm not saying everything is within the domain of science. But I think you should have to, my view is you should push science as far as you can. And you don't really know in advance how far that is. And the other thing, from a sociological point of view, it's the experiences at the bottom, they transform us as individuals, whereas the experiences at the top, they transform the world. Okay, so it's the people like Jesus and Buddha, there might be few and far between, but they change the world. And there's no doubt about that. Whatever your view about the validity of mystical experiences, there's no doubt that they are the things that most profoundly affect the world. So let me now talk a bit about the link between transpersonal psychology and paranormal. Now, of course, the great expert on this is Mike Daniels, and of course, I'm delighted he's here. So this is a paper Mike wrote just over 10 years ago. These are just a list of things, of topics, which are of mutual interest to transpersonal psychologists and parapsychologists. I mean, I won't go through them all. Auras, channeling, angels, synchronicity, lucid dreaming, NDEs, OBEs, past life memories, possession, prophecy, precognition, reincarnation, shamanic experience, spiritual healing, stigmata, telepathy, trance, UFOs. Obviously, you're getting into the sort of things which are maybe out of the domain of conventional parapsychology at the bottom. Well, I have just gone through them all, but I mean, I'm not going to go through them because you're familiar with all these ideas. So there's no doubt that the transpersonal psychologists and parapsychologists are interested in common phenomena, but they do, of course, approach them in a different way. And let's take this example. This is, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but I'll just quote it. This is about Saint Teresa. We saw her picture before. As I was looking on, she was raised about half a yard from the ground without her feet touching it. At this I was terrified, and she, for her part, was trembling all over. So I moved over to where she was, and I put my hands under her feet, over which I remained weeping for something like half an hour while the ecstasy lasted. Then suddenly she sunk down and rested on her feet, and turning her head round to me, she asked me who I was and whether I'd been there all the while. Now, that's a well-known example of a phenomena which involves transpersonal psychology and parapsychology. If you're a parapsychologist, let's imagine it was Ingrid floating in the air. If you're a parapsychologist, what's most of interest to you is the fact that Ingrid is defying gravity and floating up in the air. If you're a transpersonal psychologist, you're actually more interested in her experiences, her mystical union with God and things like that. But basically, it's the same phenomena, but we're looking at it from a different perspective, from an outside perspective and an inside perspective. And really, that's why there is this inevitable overlap between the two. And of course, in practice, we're interested in both questions because we're all human beings. Now, despite the overlap of interest, there is a huge, I think, there's a big antipathy between the spiritual people and the psychologists or the parapsychological people. And of course, you know all about that, but let me just go briefly through where that comes from. Why is there? Well, on the spiritual side, it seems to me, of course, many spiritual traditions take the view that psychic powers are basically a distraction from the spiritual path. So, you know, if you're in the Buddhist tradition, for example, I know we've got many Buddhists here, the siddhis are just a distraction. They're flowers by the wayside. You just want to go right up and get enlightened. Don't get distracted by psychic powers. If you're of a Christian tradition, or Catholic, you might even think psychic powers are demonic or something, even worse. The other point is that, of course, many people take the view that mystical experiences by their very nature are actually ineffable. You know, you can't express them in words, and therefore how can you have them, how can they be part of science? And indeed, that may be true at some level, but I'm going to argue that there are some aspects of mystical experience that are compatible with science. Indeed, part of what I'm trying to do is to have a theory of physics even, which is going to accommodate some aspects of mystical experience. And then the other reason is that I think sometimes spiritual people, sorry, I'm sure there's spiritual people here, but sometimes spiritual people tend to look down upon psychic phenomena as being just a little bit lowbrow, you know. Well, it's not a really spiritual experience, it's just a psychic experience. I think that's very artificial because I think some psychic experiences can be enormous. I mean, you can have an out-of-the-body experience which may have tremendous spiritual repercussions. On the other hand, you might be doing something spiritual like praying and actually not doing anything very spiritual at all. But so, I mean, and of course I think the person, Ken Wilber's the person, and you refer to Ken Wilber, I mean, he's sort of, obviously, he takes the view that psychic phenomena at least are part of the sort of transpersonal and the gateway to the spiritual. So obviously I don't agree with these criticisms, but at least one has to be aware of them. On the other hand, what's the antipathy from the parapsychological side? Well, parapsychologists, by and large, I think, are a little bit uncomfortable talking about spirituality. I don't mean everybody, like the people here, there must be exceptions. but I mean, after all, the whole field of parapsychology is regarded as too mystical by some, by the rest of psychologists and scientists, perhaps. Even at Trinity, I was called the college mystic because I was interested in parapsychology. I wasn't mystical at all, but they called me the college mystic. I mean, my fellow fellows called me the college mystic. I guess it's a term that meant to be a bit derogatory, but anyway. I think parapsychology, therefore, as a group, is a little bit embarrassed about spirituality. And in a way, that's not surprising because it sort of, it arose out of parapsychology, the Rhinian school, arose out in the behaviorism. That's how it arose. And so any reference to sort of things like that was embarrassing. And then, of course, also there's the issue of experience versus experiment, which is what I talked about before. Parapsychologists normally, that term normally refers to the people who do experiments in the laboratory. And again, those people are not normally so interested in experience. I mean, I'm being oversimplifying here, but generally speaking, they're not so interested in the experience. They just want to do experiments and get statistics out and prove that something's happening, some anomalous transfer of information. By and large, they're not so interested in the experience. And indeed, I think with some parapsychologists, you really want to keep the psychic. You don't want to be the psychic. You want to keep the psychic there as like a guinea pig, and you don't want to become the psychic, because then you can't be objective. So there's this element of pushing away experience, and this itself gives rise to the famous dichotomy in the field between laboratory work and spontaneous studies, lab versus life. And anyone here who works in psychical research, such as David, realizes there is this tension in the field between the people who work in labs, the university people, and the people who actually go out and study poltergeists and things. And I organize a conference every year, and we try and bring these two groups together and have both of these aspects. And to some extent we succeed, but it's a little bit of a battle. Because the laboratory people sometimes tend to say, oh, I'm not really interested in all this poltergeist. And the poltergeist people sometimes say, I'm not really interested in all this statistics. But it's really, that's part of the tension. Now, however, I'm giving rather a gloomy view. But it's not, the picture's getting much better. First of all, there's a lot of emphasis now on what's called the ecological validity of laboratory work. That's to say, you try and make the conditions in the laboratory represent what really happens in real life. So when you try and use psych-induced states in your experiment, that's the Ganzfeld. You might train your subjects using meditation. You select subjects who you think are going to be psychic, creative people, for example, rather than just choosing at random undergraduates. You make your subjects more interesting. Instead of using xenocars, you use pornographic pictures or something. And then people are aware of the famous experimenter effect. The belief system of the experimenter actually affects the results. People matter, okay? They're not just machines. And the people who do these experiments are very aware of that. And then there's also, on the other side, there's this greater emphasis on experience in psychology itself. And of course, you are the representation of that. I mean, in other words, looking at psi from the inside rather than from the outside. And of course, the rising status of the transpersonal psychology section, due to people here, is the proof of that, starting, I believe, in 1996. But another thing, I hope I can mention this without getting into trouble, but I know, of course, there's also the consciousness and experiential psychology group, which is sort of a lie, but split in some sense. And it's interesting because I don't know if it's too simplistic, but it always seems to me that the sort of the tensions between the transpersonal and conscious and experiential psychology group exactly mirror, really, the tensions between the sort of the laboratory emphasis and the sort of fieldwork emphasis in parapsychology. Because my understanding is, I've never been to a conscious and experiential group meeting, that they just don't want to refer to, they don't like the word transpersonal or spiritual. Yeah. So it's, and there's of course this famous book, which I think came out much the same time, by Carr, which sort of puts it all very nicely. How does parapsychology help spirituality? Well, I think what it does is, by studying phenomena like OBEs and NDEs, near-death experiences, and DBVs, dead visions, what's important about that is that it suggests that there is a part of your consciousness, mind, which is not simply a function of the brain. That we are not, our consciousness is not just the excreta of the brain, if you like. Mind you, not all parapsychologists take that view. I think quite a lot of parapsychologists are probably, reductionists in that sense. But at least it suggests that might not be the case. And then, of course, the evidence for survival. We're going to hear more about that from David. That, if you like, is if survival occurs, it would be clinching evidence, of course, that the consciousness is not produced by the brain. But again, there are a lot of people who are interested in parapsychology and believe in psychic phenomena, but don't believe in survival. But nevertheless, it raises the question, and that's what's so important. And more importantly, it shows, it's not just a question of whether consciousness comes from the brain, it's the deeper question of reduction. Is the reductionist picture of science valid, that everything in the world just comes down to physics? And I'll be addressing that later. And this is just a quote, nuns help scientists see light with God spots. The point is, they did some experiments on nuns, and they found that when they had religious experience, bits of the brain lit up. And over and over again you hear this, that, therefore God doesn't exist, it's all in the brain. And it really is, to me, such a naive view, because, even if, what did we have for dessert last night? It was really, the cream, sorry, Julie? Sorry? Oh, roulade, yes, thank you. Yeah, you have roulade, and sure, something lights up in your brain. A part of your brain lights up when you have this nice roulade, lemon roulade. But the fact is, the roulade exists. And I can well believe that whenever you have an experience, something lights up in the brain. But it doesn't mean that is just a function of the brain. And I think and in some sense, I think parapsychology plays an important role in demonstrating that. Now, Les isn't here. But in trying to forge this link between parapsychology and transpersonal experience, spiritual experience, Les always uses the word sacred science. Because remember, I'm trying to extend science as well, make the bridge with science. And I'm just taking Les's slide. He makes this link between the esoteric and psi, which is parapsychology and spirituality, if you like. And he's, of course, studied this at depth in his books, the different techniques for studying psi and studying the esoteric traditions. And the link is, of course, consciousness. And of course, that's our transpersonal psychology. But if Les was here, I'm sure will be saying these things. But I'm sure he has said these things himself on other occasions. But okay, now that's the first bridge. Thank you. So now I'm coming to the second bridge, okay? Now this is the link between, remember, the link between science and parapsychology, the link between matter and mind. And the people, of course, who study the mental aspect of psi are the parapsychologists. And there are, of course, many parapsychologists here. But less familiar are the people who study the links between matter and psi, and they're often called paraphysicists. Not a word everybody likes. It turns off quite a lot of physicist, but anyway, that's the term I'll use. So really, what I'm saying is a complete picture of psi requires you approach it both as a parapsychologist and as a paraphysicist. But that balance is very severely lacking. Now this is a picture I summarized in the Paranormal Review. I wrote a little article about all the 80 people who've now got PhDs in parapsychology. These are all the places where they work around the United Kingdom. And it's, is it 15 or something? 15 places now. No, sorry. 14 places, I think, where people were studying parapsychology in the university departments. And it really is amazing. In just 20 years, the subject has become respectable. Okay? Even if people that believe in parapsychology, they're studying parapsychology. And that's great to me, because you could talk about it now. And who was saying last night, they're even putting it in the A-level syllabus now. So, I mean, this is really a remarkable progress. For those people who think this is all, it's just not interesting, it's not part of the science. Yes, absolutely. Now, that's the point. Absolutely. You mustn't get the view that all these people studying parapsychology necessarily believe the phenomena. But the point is, they're studying the psychology of belief. But it's still progress in my view. I mean, because at least it means people are talking about, it's the thin edge of the wedge. That's how, first of all, people can talk about it, and then they can actually believe in it. So, but David's correct. I mean, I'm giving a rather over-rosy picture here, because there are well-known skeptics, well-known skeptics. But now, this is great, okay? But let's see what the situation is with paraphysics. Only one person, actually, a physicist, actually works on these, and that's Brian Josephson in Cambridge. He's never had a PhD student. In fact, he's retired now, so he never will. So, to me, there's something really balanced in the situation. On the other hand, if you go back to 1985, only 24 years ago, look at the situation in parapsychology. There was only Edinburgh. So in just 25 years, we've blossomed from Edinburgh to all these places, and maybe my hope is that the same thing might happen in paraphysics in the next 20 years. So what's the year? 2034 or something. But now, actually, last night, I was thinking, well, maybe I should do a similar plot for transpersonal psychology. And so I've just added this in here. And it's probably not right, but as far as I'm aware, the only group who do transpersonal psychology are at Northampton and Liverpool. I'm sorry, I apologize if I've missed some names out here. So actually, from that point of view, transpersonal psychology is not doing too well either. So let's hope there will be another proliferation, and we'll have 20 more transpersonal psychology groups as well in 20 years' time. Anyway, so that's a sort of sociological aspect. Now, why is it, though? But remember, I'm saying there's also a great aversion. Many people oppose a bridge in between parapsychology and science and physics. When I talk about science, I'm really talking about physics in particular, because I'm a physicist. And let me just illustrate this. I mean, these are just some quotes to show you the intensity of the feeling. John Taylor: there is a clear contradiction between science and most supernatural phenomena. The entire edifice of physics would have to be reconstructed from the ground up if it had to embrace psi phenomena. That's a view many people take. Gerhard de Hooft, a Nobel laureate: modern physics seems to offer leeway to the paranormal. As a theoretical physicist, I must assert most emphatically that this leeway is only apparent. There is absolutely no way one can explain the paranormal in this fashion. So, I'm up against some big guns, and furthermore, they're probably representative of the field as a whole. Brian Pippard is dead now, but he made, I think, a much more interesting remark. If the existence of these phenomena, paranormal, is doubtful, it is because the evidence is scanty and often of dubious provenance. It is not because they cannot be invoked in physical terms. They involve, after all, a class of system beyond the scope of physical theory, that is to say, conscious human beings. I do not say consciousness is not at this time understood from the laws of physics. I say it cannot be so understood. So what he's saying is, the point about paranormal phenomena is they involve consciousness, and consciousness, he's saying, is not part of physics. So for him, it's not the issue of whether they're real or not, it's by definition, it's not part of physics. That's a much more subtle criticism, because what I want to argue is that consciousness can become and should be part of physics. On the other hand, you won't find the parapsychologists are much more welcoming of a bridge. John Palmer, generally speaking, the experimental evidence suggests that ESP can occur at great distances and does not decline with distance. These findings do not fit well with most hypotheses that physical energies mediate the transmission of extrasensory information. Well, I disagree with that, because I think John Palmer, I think he disagrees with it now, but it's a very naive view of what physics is, and that's one of the points I'm going to make. A lot of people say this, it can't be physical because it doesn't decrease with distance. That's just a very simplistic definition of physical. But here's John Beloff. The attempt to reconcile physics and parapsychology is misguided. Asking for an explanation of the mind-matter interaction could only lead to endless and profitless regress. Now, John was one of these people. He liked to think that psi was anarchic. There are quite a lot of people who like psi because they think precisely that it's not scientific. It's anarchic. It's breaking down the laws. Some people like that idea. I don't. I want to make it all part of science. I want it to be normal, natural, rather than supernatural. But it is a view, and John was a very great contributor to the field. And I've spoken about this before, but I think the fundamental reason for this stress, this tension, is because most physicists, most scientists, adopt the reductionist view. And what the reductionist view is, it says that ultimately everything is based on oh, I didn't mean to do that. I keep using this as a pointer. Ultimately, no, that's the microphone, sorry. Ultimately, thank you, yes, thank you, Ingrid, yes, thank you, yeah. Ultimately, there's physics, everything rests on physics, like queen of the sciences, or king of the sciences. Chemistry is explained in terms of physics, biology is explained in terms of chemistry, neurophysiology is explained in terms of biology, psychology is explained in neurophysiology, maybe psi even is explained in terms of psychology. You can be a reductionist parapsychologist. Now, I don't want to go about, there are lots of question marks there, quite apart from parapsychology. But nevertheless, that is, most scientists actually are reductionists. And, but you see, the reason physicists don't like, I think the reason many physicists don't like psi, they see it as a threat to reductionism, okay? I've already referred to the evidence that consciousness is just produced by the brain, in other words, the idea that this can be reduced, that the psychology can reduce the brain function. Parapsychology goes against that, so physicists don't like that. On the other hand, I think a lot of parapsychologists reject physical models of psi because it's a threat of reductionism. They think we're becoming reductionists. So I think that's part of the reason. But of course, I want to have a picture which overcomes those criticisms. But then why am I so keen to have this interaction between psi and physics? To have a connection between psi and physics? Well, first of all, it's come out in the wrong order on my PowerPoint, but I'll say it down first anyway. An interaction with physics is required. If paranormal, I said this right at the beginning, that if paranormal phenomena are real, consciousness does interact with the physical world. I focus on Ingrid, and she floats in the air. That is an interaction with the physical world. I mean, hypothetically. No, I'm not going to do it. But the point is, if psi is real, there is an interaction with the physical world. So you need an extension of physics to explain it. But apart from that, this bridge must be good for psychical research, because the one thing psychical research misses is a theory. Now, my view is that science will never take psychical research really seriously, well, however much the data, unless you have a proper theory. And we don't have a theory. And when I say a theory, I sort of mean ultimately a theory which relates to physics. Here's a quote from Henry Margenau: "No amount of empirical evidence, no mere collection of facts will convince all scientists of the veracity and significance of your reports. You must provide some sort of model. You must advance bold constructs in terms of which theoretically ESP can be understood." And that's really what us paraphysicists want to do. But it's also good for physics. This is a quote, actually it's from me. I feel embarrassed quoting myself, but I said this a long time ago. Well, I'm always confronted, most of my physics colleagues think this field is nonsense, so I have to justify to them. And I always give what I call the minimum response. Even if one regards the probability of psi being real as small, its significance, if confirmed, will be so immense that its investigation is worth undertaking. And that's what I say to people who don't believe it. I say, even if you think there's only 1 in a million chance that this is valid, it would be so significant you've got to put some effort into it. Because in physics, the great progress always comes when there's some little anomaly that doesn't fit in. But then there's the other claim, of course, which goes back to Arthur Koestler, that physics is already exotic enough to accommodate psi. The unthinkable phenomena of extrasensory perception appear somewhat less preposterous in the light of the unthinkable propositions of modern physics. When I had to do a PhD, I had to decide whether to do parapsychology or physics. And in those days, there were no jobs in parapsychology, so I did a PhD with Stephen Hawking in cosmology. And because that was respectable, I could get a job. But the things I now study in physics are just as bizarre as anything in parapsychology. I mean, I study things like black holes and time machines and wormholes and, weird quantum effects, the multiverse, which you can't even see, So the things I study in physics are actually just as weird as the things in parapsychology. It's just that for some reason it's socially acceptable to study them. So that's the reason why it's so good. Let me just give you a little bit about the... I'm not going to try... I'm a physicist, but I'm not going to try and, explain physics to you. But I just want to get one point across, which is one of the great triumphs of physics is that it is actually... It has unified all the forces. It has a unified view of all the interactions in nature. And in fact, you can see the history of physics as really the attempts to unify the different forces. So, for example, we started off with our knowledge of electricity and magnetism. And then, of course, Faraday and Maxwell, in the 18th century, they produced a unified theory of electromagnetism. Then we discovered the weak force, and the weak force is the force involved in radioactive decay. And then in the 1970s, it was realized that the weak and the electric force are part of the electroweak force. Okay, and that was demonstrated in the accelerators. They got the Nobel Prize. There's the strong force, which is responsible for the holding nuclei together and producing atomic bombs and things like that. And there's also a theory called granularification, which shows that the strong force can also be unified. So we're sort of going forward through time, and this is going to the 1980s or so. The great but the great challenge now in physics is to unify these forces with the force of gravity. Okay? And now we're on the verge of doing that. The current theory, which is called M theory. Don't ask me what M stands for. It can be many things. Sorry?
Is it meta theory?
No. M is M theory. It's the theory of physics. And M actually, some people say M stands for mother. Some people say it stands for mystery. Some people say it stands for matrix. Actually, for me, it stands for mind. But anyway. Or mundane.
Or muddle.
Oh, muddle theory, right. I hope not at the end of the talk, anyway, yeah. So anyway, that's the great that's the great triumph of physics, that we've done that. And, I mean, it really is amazing. We've only been doing physics for 300 years or so, and it's just amazing that we've already got just a complete view on the verge of this theory of everything. But is it a theory of everything? You see, there is something missing there. And you see what's missing? Yes, consciousness. You see, half my experience is not the physical world. Half my experience is what's going on in my mind, okay? Consciousness, my dream world and my transpersonal experiences and everything like that. And none of this is referred to. So how can we call it the theory of everything when half the world's missing? So really the crucial thing is that there has to be consciousness. Now, you'll find that there are different views about consciousness in science. For a long time, many scientists said consciousness has nothing to do with science, physics at least. Remember that quote from Pippard. John Watson, the time seems to have come when psychology must discard all references to consciousness, when it need no longer delude itself into thinking that it is making mental states the object of observation. So even the psychologists were telling us not to think about consciousness. Here's Daniel Dennett. Consciousness appears to be the last bastion of occult properties, epiphenomena, and immeasurable subjective states. In short, the one area of mind best left to philosophers, who are welcome to it. Let them make fools of themselves trying to corral the quicksilver of phenomenology into a respectable theory. So, it's a big name. And Dennett's quite big, by the way. But he's extreme, of course. But nevertheless, there are people who take that view. On the other hand, there are other big names on the other side. John Wheeler, mind and universe are complementary. There is this hint from physics itself that mind is a fundamental part of the world. Bernard Despianet, the doctrine that the world is made up of objects whose existence are independent of human consciousness turns out to be in conflict with quantum mechanics and with facts established by experiments. Quantum theory is the buzzword you'll often hear when people want to discuss consciousness and parapsychology. Noam Chomsky, the famous linguist, physics must expand to explain mental experiences. Roger Penrose, we need a revolution in physics on the scale of quantum theory and relativity before we can understand mind. So there are plenty of people who realize we need to get consciousness into the picture. So if we go back to this diagram, the question is there some way I can get consciousness into the consciousness and the first person and mind into the picture? And that's what I want to do. And what I want to now do is to talk about how that might be done. Now, probably the most popular approach, and I'm sure the one you've heard about and read about, is the attempts to use quantum theory. And Dean Radin is a great proponent of this. There's this idea of entanglement, quantum entanglement. Now, do you all know what entanglement is? So it's basically, you've got two particles, they go off in their separate directions, and you do something to the particle over here, and it actually tells you what this particle is doing, even though in causal mechanisms that's can't happen. So basically it's saying there is this link, which in some sense is outside space and time. And that does happen. That's standard quantum theory. It's not supposed to allow signaling, but it does happen. And in Radin's book, The Entangled Mind, he argues that this basically is the secret of these paranormal phenomena. And what he does is he studies the different scales in which you have entanglement. I mean, because, of course, it was originally discovered in the context of what's called the EPR, Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox, on the subatomic scale. But now it's been experimentally tested, and it applies on much larger scales, on the scales of macromolecules, even on the scale of the proteins. I think the world record is this object. In other words, they've got evidence for entanglement. And I think there's even claims that you've got non-local correlations in the brain. So the real question is, does the quantum mystery also work on macroscopic levels? If something like entanglement occurred on the macroscopic scale of human beings, or even collections of human beings, you would certainly have a theory of psi. And so the question which it raised, is psi an experiential glimpse of the holistic fabric of reality? What if the universe were fully entangled? What would experience be like in that holistic medium? This is actually Dean Radin's slide. We might occasionally feel connected to others at a distance. We might know things without the use of ordinary senses. Our intentions might reverberate through the entangled medium. In other words, whereas in the classical picture, the only way we communicate is through signals in space and time, maybe in this sort of more holistic picture, objects have acausal connections which transcend space and time. And so in Radian's view, that is how we explain psi. And so you've got this link, this deep link. There's the reductionist diagram I started, but you've got two of them here. And quantum mechanics is sort of making a link, which is different from the normal classical link. Well, so is that the explanation? Well, actually, I don't think it is. I do think quantum theory will play a part in it. I don't think it's the full answer. And the point is, nobody understands quantum theory anyway, okay? So just saying we've explained psi in terms of quantum theory is just saying we've explained one mystery in terms of another mystery. What I think we need a deeper theory which explains both quantum mechanics and psi and consciousness. Now, so what I want to do is I want to talk about paradigms. I want to say a little bit about paradigm shifts, because I want to give you a paradigm for psi, okay? So let me just say a little bit about paradigms. Physics doesn't just tell you the ultimate, truth. Physics has evolved through a series of paradigm shifts. Our view of the world, presented by physicists, evolves, and it tends to evolve in jumps. And the paradigms are essentially a form of perception. And the point is that when you get a paradigm shift, it's because they're little anomalies which don't fit in, and then eventually, people fight for the old paradigm, but they die off and the new paradigm comes in. And I would argue that psi reveals little gaps in the current paradigm. And so the question is, what will the next paradigm be like? That person there doesn't want to see the anomalies. Some people think it's Richard Wiseman, but it's just like it isn't necessary. But the point is that's 99% of scientists. Now, have you seen this? I'm sure you've seen this. If you haven't, now, this is just a nice little example. Science has yet to learn how to think about psi. Who knows what that is? Don't say no, don't say. Just don't say what it is. Some of you have seen it before. If you've not seen it before, can you see what that is? If you've seen it before, obviously don't say.
I've not seen it before, but is it a peacock? It looks like a peacock.
Oh, good guess, but okay. Then you must know that, David.
I've seen it before, but I still can't see it now.
Oh dear. Okay. Sorry?
I haven't seen it before. I haven't seen what they are. It's a couple of guys.
Perfect. Right, you're very evolved, because look, that's the answer. It's two people dancing. But the point is, once you've seen it, now you go back and it's easy to, now you can see it, can't you? And the remarkable thing is, once you've seen this, you will always see it apart from David, you will always see it in the future, because you've gone through that paradigm shift. You can see it now, Ingrid. The two people, you can see it there, can't you?
Yeah, I can see it.
Right, okay. And so now can you see it? Once you've shifted, you have made the paradigm shift, and now you can see them.
Still keep seeing the little panda on the
Well, okay, yeah, but you're still held back a bit by the the panda paradigm. Yeah. Now, so we need a new paradigm, and what's this new paradigm going to be? Well, it's got to incorporate consciousness, it's got to transcend space and time, and it's got to incorporate mental phenomena in some radically new way. And I mean more radically than quantum theory. And here's a quote from Jim Beikler, who's one of the few paraphysicists, the only paraphysicist to work in the university department, although actually he no longer does, but anyway. Parapsychology is littered with hypothetical structures to explain the psi process or some features of it, but no comprehensive theory. Either psi does not exist, or psi is so fundamental that it is intimately interwoven into the fabric of reality. And that's my view. We want a theory of psi. I believe that whatever the theory is, it's psi, and not just psi, but normal, remember, as paranormal and spiritual experiences, they've all got to be a part of this paradigm. So what is the paradigm? Now, what is the time? I've got 10 minutes.
You want to leave some time for questions?
Yeah.
Maybe finish in about 5 minutes?
No, I thought you said an hour from when I started talking.
An hour if you wish. But
Oh, I don't want to take up question. I don't want to miss question time. Oh, I thought I was going from. Okay, what I'm going to do. Okay, let me do the following. I'm going to go through some slides very fast because I'm not going to show them. This is all about dimensionality. Because let me just say, the bottom line is my theory, my approach is that higher dimensionality is crucial. But I'm going to miss out this part of this. So don't worry about this. Close your eyes. Okay, let me just say the following. What the physical paradigms have told us, our theories of physics have told us, that as our theories of physics have evolved, the dimensionality of the universe has increased. So, for example, in the Newtonian picture, we had the view that the world is just 3 dimensions of space. Absolute space and absolute time. When special relativity came along, we realized that actually space and time are part of a 4-dimensional continuum called space-time. So space became 4-dimensional. Now, most of you are familiar with these ideas, but if you're not, I can't really explain them in much more detail. But then general relativity came along, and general relativity says, well, space-time is curved. And that means, in some sense, you have to think about it as being sort of embedded in a higher dimensional space. And then Einstein produces geometrical interpretation of gravity, essentially. That's what general relativity is. And then in the 1920s, it was realized you could also have a geometrical interpretation of electromagnetism, which you remember was that other force. And this involved a 5th dimension. But the 5th dimension was sort of wrapped up very, very small. And so you don't see the 5th dimension because it's wrapped up so small that you can't. It's too small to see, essentially. And that was the Kaluza-Klein picture. And now I told you about M theory. In M theory, there are not just one extra dimension, there are lots of other dimensions as well. And all the other forces are associated with these extra dimensions. But these extra dimensions are sort of folded up. They're compactified, so again, you don't see them. And in M theory itself, there's something like 11 dimensions in total. So you've got 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, and you've got these extra 7 dimensions which are wrapped up. Actually, the currently popular theory, it's called Randall-Sundrum theory, and it says that one of these dimensions at least is extended. One of these 5th dimensions is extended rather than wrapped up. And our whole universe, our whole 4-dimensional physical world, is a brane, B-R-A-N-E. It's like a 4-dimensional sheet in what's called a bulk, okay, with a higher dimensional bulk. So that's the view of physics, at least some rather popular view of physics at the moment. The physical world is a 4-dimensional sheet in a higher dimensional bulk, okay? I know it's hard to envisage, but anyway, that's what it is. Now, so that's the view of physics. This brief history of higher dimensions is so brief that it's subliminal. Okay, I'm not going to go through this because I didn't actually, to be honest, I didn't really expect to get through this. But let me just, this is the, let me just end up with this picture of, I just want you to see this picture here. That's the only thing you need to see. This is the picture of the brain in the bulk. So can you remember that? We live on a brain in a higher dimensional bulk. This is this part of the talk I'm just not going to produce. I can go through it later if you like, but I don't want to make it part of my main talk. Now, so what is the new paradigm? You see, I think what is the fundamental problem I really started with is that we have the 2 worlds of matter and mind. And there are various qualities that you associate with these. I sort of did that in my first slide. Matter is outside, mind, things are inside, matter's objective, mind is subjective. Mind is public, matter's public, mind is private, matter's third person, mind is first person, real, imaginary, experiment, experience, science, mysticism. So there's this dichotomy. And so most people take this dualistic view, that they're simply two different worlds. But what I want to argue is this new paradigm is going to show that that dichotomy is illusory. And the crucial link is that they both involve a form of space. The physical world is, if you like, outer space, but then my mental world, the world I experience in dreams and mystical experiences, is what we call inner space, but they're both a space. And to me, that is the crucial clue. And so I want to illustrate that by, sorry, I'm just going through that one too fast. What I want to argue is that all psychic phenomena, well, the most of the psychic phenomena involve some form of space. And let me just go through some of these to give you an example. Let's take apparitions. Now, of course, most psychologists will say that apparitions are just hallucinations. But psychical researchers think there's more to it than that, because sometimes these hallucinations are veridical, they convey information. Sometimes they are experienced by more than one person. They're like a classic ghost story. Sometimes you have collective apparitions. This is the famous picture of a ghost. Now, I'm not saying it is a picture of a ghost, but that's a sort of traditional view of a picture of a ghost. Which suggests that it really is. I mean, you can have a collective apparition where somebody, Queen Elizabeth I is walking through here, and more than one of you will see her, and will see her even from a certain perspective. As though she's not really in the physical world. And that's one of the puzzles that, for example, my friend Tony Cornell, oh my goodness, why can't I get the... Yeah. He has spent his life, I think the battery may be going on this. Let me just... he spent half his life looking for... he's built up these machines for detecting physical effects associated with apparitions and things, and doesn't find them. It really is as though these things are not on a physical level, and yet they seem to exist in a sort of space. In some sense, they really seem to be there, but it's not physical space. Let's take out-of-the-body experiences. Well, of course, quite a number of us have had out-of-body experiences, and it really does feel as though you're actually in a space, and it looks just like physical space. Of course, again, the psychologists will say, well, it's all an illusion. And yet, sometimes you have veridical situations in which someone will leave their body and they will go and even be apparent to someone close to them. And in fact, I know people here who've had that experience. And therefore, again, it suggests that it isn't just imagination. They really do seem to be moving in some space. And yet it isn't really the physical world, because when you have these experiences, you'll find there's some anomaly. You'll go out of your body, you'll leave the house, and you'll find the chimneys the wrong colour or something. And so it's weird. And then one of the first experiments I ever did was to try and weigh people when they had out-of-body experiences, see if their weight went down. And there's no evidence for that. So it's... Mind you, I'm not saying that's big. I was only an undergraduate, so it wasn't a very good experiment. But, I mean, it's as though it's happening in a space, but it's not actually physical space. Let's talk about near-death experiences. Well, you've heard a lot about near-death experiences. And I should incidentally say that the person who's doing really interesting work on this is David Russo. I mean, studying the experiences people have in OBEs and NDEs and relating them to this hard-dimensional approach I'm taking. So I'm hoping David will talk about this later on today, at least at some other occasion. Near-death experiences. Again, we know there's this uniformity across all different cultures of the experiences people have, the tunnel, etc. Presumably, if you believe in survival, the survival space, the space in which souls reside after death, is something to do with the space experience in near-death experiences. But then even dreams. You don't have to be talking about paranormal things. I mean, when I have dreams, I have very vivid dreams, and they're in a space, color, and I have dreams which are so vivid, it's just like now. In fact, I've had situations where I don't actually know whether I'm dreaming or not. I mean, dreams can be so vivid. I've even given talks, I've been in situations where I'm giving talks in dreams, and I wake up and I think, oh no, I didn't finish the talk. I hope it won't happen today. Yeah, that's... And Price said, we inhabit two worlds simultaneously, the world of common experience governed by physical law and another space quite as real which obeys other laws. Continuous dream life goes on throughout our waking hours, and occasionally we may catch a glimpse of it. So there's a part of our beings which is actually observing the world from this higher dimensional perspective. And then even the whole problem of phenomenal space. What is the relationship between my perception of the world and the world itself? This is a philosophical problem that goes back hundreds of years. What is the relation between the object and the percept? We were talking about this last night with David and Julie. The relationship between naive realism, which says that you really are seeing the person and the object, and representative theory, which says that it's just a representation in your mind. These are all aspects of the same essential problem. What is the relationship between matter and mind? And the claim is you need a space which is not the same as physical space but relates to it, and it unifies all of these things. It unifies phenomenal space, memory space, dream space, ESP space, OBE space, survival space. In other words, you are associating all experiences, including physical, with a higher dimensional space. Because the crucial thing is it's not physical space, and what is it? It's a higher dimensional space. My particular approach. And it's an approach which many other people have also advocated. Now, how does this work? I guess 3 more minutes, David, is that all right? Again, I'm going to go through this very quickly. What do we mean by reality? If you were to ask a philosopher a few hundred years ago, he would have said reality is a three-dimensional space, okay, in Newton's day. What I mean by that is that we exist in a three-dimensional space. We're sitting here, the objects are at certain locations, our senses are at certain locations, and the three-dimensional reality just means that we can fit our observers and our objects, and we get a consistent view of the world. It reconciles all our different perceptions of the world, okay? That's what we mean by reality. It's a model a three-dimensional structure which reconciles all our perceptions of the world. But that's wrong. Because actually, we know from relativity that the world is really four-dimensional. The only way to reconciling our different perceptions of the world is to assume reality is four-dimensional. And that's more complicated. But that's the way it is. And this is, again, even more complicated, but that is a four-dimensional picture. Now we've got world lines. We observe the world along past light cones. And so each of these slices, S3s, are spatial slices, but this is a four-dimensional picture. Sorry, rather complicated if you're not used to relativity. But that is the four-dimensional standard view of the world. But even that is only a description of physical objects. And what about those other half of things which do not exist in the physical world? Well, what I'm proposing is that in order to incorporate those, you need a higher dimensional space. It's a sort of higher dimensional information space which reconciles all our experiences, not only of the physical world, but of the mental world as well. And so here is, just as in some sense, this three-dimensional cube was sort of reconciling our two-dimensional perceptive fields. Now you've got to extend this to the mental perceptual fields, and you need this higher dimensional space, which is represented by this hypercube, as it's called, but just as a symbol. And this is what I call a universal structure. And then the fourth stage is that universal structure is identified with the higher dimensional picture of physics. Because remember, this was the picture I described in which you have the world as a brain, a four-dimensional brain in a five-dimensional bulk, but no more than 5 dimensions. This is the modern picture. But the point is, physics already tells us we've got this higher dimensional space. And the physical world is just a slice of that. What else exists out there in the bulk? Well, what is there? There's our mind. So I identify this higher dimensional space, what is here called bulk space, with mind space. Okay, that's the particular paradigm. Now, physicists will not like this. If there were any physicists here, I would be burnt at the stake probably for saying this. But nevertheless, that is the view which I personally think is going to be the key to this new paradigm. And so, just to conclude, therefore, when I say parapsychology makes the link between matter and mind, being more precise, I'm claiming that higher dimensions is what's providing that link between matter and mind. And I suppose to sum it up, is a quote from Paul Brunton a long time ago: we must learn to mentalize space and spatialize mind. And I think that summarizes it. Thank you.
Yep. I'm only going to speak a half a minute. You can see why we have this loving nickname for Bernard sometimes, the late Bernard Carr.
Yeah.
But honestly, Bernard, I cannot remember a talk which, as chair, and I've chaired hundreds of sessions, that I've been more reluctant to bring to a conclusion.
Well, thank you.
That was absolute magic, and you see the quality of the man.
Thank you.
Not only is he a brilliant scientist, but he's a brilliant teacher. Thank you ever so much, Bernard. I think we have to allow a minute or two for questions. The trouble is, Bernard has to go tomorrow, so it's your only chance to grab him.
Not till I have to go
lunchtime.
at lunchtime tomorrow. Yeah.
I just wanted, I like your idea of this fifth dimension. And I wonder, if you have a spiritual experience that isn't a paranormal experience, but a spiritual experience, which I guess means different things to different people, do you think that that's a glimpse into this fifth dimension?
Yes. The point I'm making is that this space, this mind space, has to incorporate all experiences. It's the normal, the paranormal, and the spiritual. Now, one thing I didn't go into details, this universal structure is higher dimensional. It's not just 5-dimensional. It's actually it's maybe 10-dimensional. If it's associated with Kaluza-Klein, it's 10 or 11 dimensions. But there's like a hierarchy of realities, if you like, associated with this. And the idea is that as you go up in dimensionality, you're accessing different levels of different dimensionalities, and that is supposed to map into the different levels of experience. Because obviously when you're having an out-of-the-body experience, to start off with, you're just in something like this physical world, or something resembling the physical world, but then at some stage you go into higher levels, different planes, if you like, and contact different types of spiritual beings, you're departed, and then in your mystical experiences you go off even further. So the claim is that almost all experiences, especially those which seem to be in some sense transcending space and time, have to be incorporated in this sort of picture. So not just the fifth dimension, though. I mean, the fifth dimension won't get you far enough. I mean, if you want to incorporate the full-blown mystical experiences, you have to go beyond. The point is, when you invoke these higher dimensions, you've got a connectivity. Okay? Things can be connected in a higher dimensional space when they're separated in the normal four-dimensional space. Thank you.
Just one more question.
Oh, Bernard, that was totally riveting. I'm really excited. It makes me want to study physics. A fantastic talk. Thank you very much. Really exciting. One question. I've got a lot, but if entanglement is a universal phenomenon, if we assume that is the case, how come that psychic experiences and spiritual experiences seem to appear in this sort of hierarchy? Why are they not evenly spread?
Well, I mean, first of all, the entanglement was something, that was the Radin view, and I was saying that actually I don't think entanglement is the whole answer, okay? But But nevertheless, the feature of entanglement which was interesting was this fact there seems to be an acausal link, a sort of link that goes beyond space and time. And that is a feature which I am taking over in this sort of approach. But there are different levels of acausal connection. Now, if you go up just to the first level, just using the fifth dimension, for example, that is the sort of level at which you can explain things like precognition, because that's a level at which, a sort of higher level of time at which all past, present, and future coexist. So that's one level of connectedness, okay, where you have a connection through time with past and present. But even then, you're only talking about the physical world. But then when you go up to higher dimensions again, you're dealing with realms which are beyond the physical world itself anyway. And so then you're talking, if you like, about entanglement with different levels of reality. I mean, the point is most physicists think of, most scientists think there is only one level of reality, okay? The point about this sort of approach is that it's a multiple level of realities. And so you've got to get beyond, even when you're talking about the fifth dimension, you're still talking about a sort of basically the physical world and seeing connectedness there. You have to go to beyond the simple fifth dimension to incorporate these other experiences. Now, the question, we're having this discussion last night, I mean, how much of experience can really be? I'm essentially trying to have a scientific or even a physical sort of theory of experience, mystical experience, and I know some people resist that, and the idea that I can reduce all experiences to physics. Some people react to that very, with some antipathy, which I understand. But I'm not saying I can reduce everything. I'm not saying I can reduce God to an equation or anything like that. But I'm just saying I want to push this picture as far as I can, because I think even mystical experiences have some aspect of them which can be described by this sort of process, and that's what I really want.
Well, but I'm awfully sorry. Grab him at coffee. You have first choice at coffee, okay? I want to think Ho then would have second choice. But let's just round things off. Your latest book, Universe or Multiverse, I think Bernard is also a multi-scholar. And he's the only man in my acquaintance in this country, but I think probably internationally, who can link together physics and mathematics, as he does, and paranormal and spirituality. He's not only the only man who has the knowledge to do it, but the only man who has the courage and, if you like, the creative vision to do it. Bernard, we are massively in your debt.
Thank you, David.
Very, very much.